From Deep Creek Station to 8 Mile Springs. The road runs to the southwest down the Deep Creek Valley and along the left bank of the western rivulet. Near the divide we found a good bottom with plenty of water and grass. The only fuel was the sagebush, which crackled merrily like thorns under the pot, but tainted the contents with its medicinal odor. The wagons were drawn up in a half circle to aid us in catching the mules. The animals were turned out to graze. The men were divided into watches, and the masters took up their quarters in the wagons. Age gave the judge a claim to the ambulance, which was admitted by all hands. I slept with Scotch Joe, an exceedingly surly youth who apparently preferred anything to work. At 8 p.m., a storm of wind and rain burst upon us from the southwest. It was so violent that the wagons rocked before the blast, and at times the chance of a capsize suggested itself. The weather was highly favorable for Indian plundering, who on such nights expect to make a successful attack. To the wilderness, 4th of October. We awoke early in the frigid southwest wind, the thermometer showing 39 degrees Fahrenheit. After a few hundred yards, we reached 8 Mile Springs, so called from the distance to Deep Creek. The road, which yesterday would have been dusty to the hub, was now heavy and viscid. The rain had washed out all the saleratus, and the sight and scent of the country generally were those of the environs of a horse pond. An ugly stretch of 2 miles, perfectly desert, led to 8 Mile Spring Canyon, a jagged little ravine about 500 yards long, with a portaled entrance of tall rock. It is not, however, considered dangerous. Several notable sources list Prairie Gate or 8 Mile Station as a Pony Express station, even though it was not listed on the 1861 mail contract, and its exact location remains unknown. The station possibly existed on the present-day Goshoot Indian Reservation, or it may have been at 8 Mile Springs, so called because of its distance to Deep Creek. It is thought that this station was probably erected after July of 1861 and was part of the Pony Express route for approximately 3 months. Beyond the canyon lay another grisly land, if possible more deplorable than before. Its only crops were dust and mud. On the right hand were turreted rocks, around whose base ran Indian trails, and a violent west wind howled over their summits. About 1:30 p.m. we came upon the station at Antelope Springs. It had been burnt by the Goshootas in the last June and had never been rebuilt. George, our cook, who had been one of the inmates at the time, told us how he and his confreres had escaped. Fortunately, the corral still stood. We found wood in plenty. Water was lying in the adjoining bottom, and we used the two to brew our tea. Antelope Springs Station, which was listed in the 1861 mail contract, has been identified by several sources as a Pony Express stop. In 1859, George Chorpening constructed this station that later served the Pony Express. On June 1st, 1860, Indians reportedly attacked the station and burnt the structures. Beyond Antelope Springs was Schell Creek, distant 30 miles by Long Road and 18 by the shortcut. We had some difficulty in persuading Kennedy to take the latter. Property not only sharpens the intellect, it also generates prudence, and the ravine is a well-known place for ambush. Fortunately, 2 express riders came in and offered to precede us. which encouraged us. Though Spring Valley Station was not listed in the 1861 mail contract as a station, and its exact location remains unknown, sources generally agree on its identity as a Pony Express station. This station did not exist when Richard Burton traveled through the area on October 5th of 1860. However, the Pony Express did stop at a site somewhere in the valley. Constant Duval, or a man named Raynal, possibly served as station keepers at Spring Valley. When Pony Express rider Elijah N. Uncle Nick Wilson stopped at the station for something to eat, he found two young boys managing operations. While Wilson was there, several Indians stole the station's horses. Wilson reportedly was killed when he tried to stop them. The Overland Mail Company line maintained a station in Spring Valley until 1869. About 3 p.m. we left the springs and struck for the mouth of the canyon, which was not named. Sevier and Farish are the rival claimants. Entering the jagged fir and pine-clad breach, we found the necessity of dismounting. The bed was dry. It floods in spring and autumn, but very steep. And in a hole on the right stood water, which we did not touch for fear of poison. Reaching the summit in about an hour, we saw below the shaggy evergreens, or everblacks, which cast grotesque and exaggerated shadows in the last rays of day. The snow-white mountains, gloriously sunlit, on the far side of Schell Creek. Here for the first time appeared the pinyon pine, which forms the principal part of the Indian's diet. It was no beauty to look upon, a dwarfish tree, rendered shrub-like by being feathered down to the ground. The nut is ripe in early autumn, at which time the savages stow away their winter provision in dry ravines and pits. The fruit is about the size of a pistachio, with a decided flavor of turpentine, tolerably palatable, and at first laxative. The cones are thrown upon the fire, and when slightly burnt, the nuts are easily extracted. These are eaten raw, or like the Hindu's toasted grains. The harvest is said to fail every second year. Last season produced a fine crop, while in this autumn many of the trees were found, without apparent reason but frost, dead. We resumed the descent along a fumara, which presently sank, and about 5 p.m. halted in a prairion somewhat beyond. Bunch grass, sage fuel, and water were abundant, but the place was favorable for an attack. It is a golden rule in Indian country never to pitch near trees or rocks that can mask an approach, and we were breaking it in a place of danger. However, the fire was extinguished early, so as to prevent its becoming a mark for Indians, and the pickets placed on both sides of the ravine were directed to lie motionless a little below the crest, and to fire at the first comer. I need hardly say we were not murdered. The cold, however, was uncommonly piercing. To Robber Roost, 5th of October. We set out at 6 a.m. the next morning, through a mixture of snow and hail and howling wind, to finish the ravine, which was in toto 8 miles long. The descent led us to Spring Valley, a bulge in the mountains about 8 miles broad, which a sharp divide separates from Schell Valley, its neighbor. On the summit we fell into the line of a rivulet, which gives the lowlands a name. At the foot of the descent we saw a woodman, and presently the station. Sources generally agree on the identity of Schell Creek, also known as Schellbourne or Fort Schellbourne. George Chorpening and Howard Egan established a station at the site in late 1859, which served the Pony Express during its existence and the Overland Mail Company line until 1869. English traveler Richard Burton stopped at Schell Creek on October 5th, 1860, and identified Francais de France Constant Duval as station keeper at the bullet-scarred log structure. Several months earlier, on June 8, 1860, Indians attacked the station. According to one source, they scared away the station's residents and destroyed the building. Another source claims that the Indians killed 3 people at the station before scattering the station's livestock. After the Pony Express ended, the Overland Mail Company established its Utah to Central Nevada district headquarters at Schell Creek in 1862-1863. Stone and log structures housed craftsmen who kept the coaches and other equipment in good repair, and the station compound grew into Fort Schellbourne, a town of 500 by the 1870s. 2 log structures, as well as other buildings, remain from the old fort. Local beliefs suggest that one of them served as the Pony Express station, but no actual proof exists. Nothing could be more tidy than this log hut, which showed the bullet marks of a recent Indian attack. The master was Francais de France, Constant Duval, and an ex-lancier. His mother's gossip had received a remittance of 2,000 francs from a son in California. Consequently, he had torn himself from the sun à Souvenir, and with 3 others had started in search of fortune, and had nearly starved. The express riders were 3 roughs, of whom one was a Mormon. We passed our time while the mules were at bait and visiting the springs. There's a cold creek 200 yards below the station, and close by the hut a warm rivulet said to contain leeches. An American Hirudo, however, has serious defect in a leech. It will not bite. The faculty, therefore, are little addicted to hirudination. Country doctors rarely keep the villainous bloodsuckers, and only the wealthy can afford the pernicious luxury, which, imported from Spain, costs $12 per dozen, somewhat the same price as oysters at Nizhny Novgorod. The weather, which was vile at 10 a.m., when the glass showed 40 degrees Fahrenheit, promised to amend, and as the filthy hole, still full of flies, despite the cold, offered no attraction. We set out at 2 p.m. for Egan Station, beyond an ill-omened canyon of the same name. We descended into a valley by a regular slope, in proportion as we leave distance between us and the Great Salt Lake. The bench formation on this line becomes less distinct, and traversed a barren plain by a heavy road. Hares and prairie hens seemed, however, to like it, and a frieze of willow thicket at the western end showed the presence of water. We and the ambulance halted at the mouth of the canyon. The stock and the boys had fallen far behind, and the place had an exceedingly bad name. But the cold was intense. The shades of evening were closing in, so we made ready for action, looked to the priming of gun and revolver, and avant. After passing the canyon, we should exchange the land of the Gosh Utah for those of the more friendly Shoshone.